what they say about it. Don't you know? Don't you know? EvonyBites. From war, server war, battlefield kill event. Vikings, witches, even purple kitties, or as some call them, Fenrir. Golems, Fafnir, lucky enough to win Rage King after about 5 damn years. Yeah, right. All the things we love about Ebony, and at the same time hate that witch. Just as much as I don't subscribe to the T1 defense pitch. Yeah, I don't know. But it don't matter each time I end up taking that off. It's Ebony.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of EvonyBites. Let's jump into it. What we're going to get into in this episode is traps, to the best of my knowledge. Now, traps are a little bit of a mysterious thing. One of the things that we all have to guesstimate on when it comes to Ebony. And I would argue that most people are guesstimating. Now, there's a couple things we can we can look at for some data here on traps. And let's go into just, say, a defense report here. Break this down a little bit. Let's go down and find our traps. So, first off, this is a defense I took here in a battlefield from a 1500 attack player, sending archers. Okay, you can see what he's got going, Moto, which is strange. These guys weren't great. They were just an old server, so you know the gig. But anyway, good little test to hit me on. But in any case, archers. Okay, keep that in mind. Archers is what he hit me with. You can see here, primarily, he's got like a spread, a T12 primary, but T12, T13, T14 archer spread. Oh, and 11. Check them out. So you can see what he sent. Let's go over here to my traps, and let's start this way. Let's just take a look at what the traps actually did in this report. All right, so look how random and sporadic this is. Okay, so try to make any sense at all as to how traps work by looking at a report, and it's very difficult to do that. But we're going to do our best here. So primarily what was effective are arrows, fire arrows, and then secondarily what was effective was rocks. Now what's interesting about that is, according to Evony, and I'll show you here in a minute where they say this, according to Evony, rocks are geared towards, or they would suggest only hurt archers. Okay, and then they say that fire arrows, well, it kind of suggests that it would only hurt siege. Now, interestingly enough, other than layers, he didn't send siege, he sent archers, but more fire arrows did damage than anything else, right? So why did arrows even affect this battle if it was just archers that came in? All right, and then why did randomly all sorts of traps at different levels here, decreasing as we go down to really nothing on the lower levels? Why did that even happen? Well, let's take a little bit of a look and dive into this and find out why that happened. A good starting place to figure out what's what on traps is to go into your academy. Go on over to defense tab. Scroll up until you find the individual attacks right here for the traps. Abattis, fire arrows, rock, and trap, which is always kind of weird to me. I'm like, use traps. What trap? Traps. Right, I know. Which trap? Traps. You know, it's like who's on first base. But anyways, when you click on this, it says increases single trap attack against ground troop. So that suggests that traps only work on ground. Well, maybe they do. All right. Abattis against mounted. Fire arrows against siege, which you can see that more fire arrows went off than anything there. Increases single rock attack against range troop. All right, so fire arrows, excuse me, fire arrows target siege, according to this, and rocks target range, according to this. So let's go back to the defense report, and let's just look at that again. All right. Okay. Now, you could be thinking to yourself a few things here as to why the traps went off like they did. And you would be right to think of those things. It's a complicated matter. So I'm going to get into why traps shouldn't really be something that you focus on. And I with a caveat, I mean, there's one exception I guess I will give to that situation. But even then, I think it's minuscule and trivial, and it's not really applicable. Now, I have a bunch of traps, so I'll explain that as well, even though I don't have a lot. Here's what I think. This goes off of Ebony Mechanics, 15 years ago when it was on PC, when it was understandable, when Evan even sort of talked about this in forums and stuff. You could get some answers out of them on how the mechanics work, and they weren't that complicated. It was far more simple how the mechanics work. You've heard me refer to this before. It's really helpful in understanding the mechanics today. But traps don't work in layers. Traps have an effective trap trigger rate. Now, that trap trigger rate is found underneath your Monarch Detail Administration. Scroll on down, and right here you can see mine is 49%. Trap triggering chance. Blah, blah, blah. I'll say it in English. Trap triggering chance. 49%. So what that means is there's a 49% chance that a single trap will even trigger. What does trigger mean? Well, in this case, we're going to just say, quote unquote, trigger. When we say that, what we mean is become active, like you are to arm the mine. So that fire arrow or that stone or the abattis or the trap, the who's on second base trap is active at this point because it's able to be triggered. So if there's a 49% chance, then that means essentially, let's call it 50 for ease of math, then half of my traps can be activated, which, yes, also means half of my traps can't even be activated. It means they can't even spring and damage someone. So, if I want 100,000 traps to be able to hit someone, I have to have 200,000 traps. Right, so you're starting to see how this trap thing becomes less attractive. It's going to become more so. Now, out of that 49%, let's say I have 200,000 traps, and there's 100,000 traps that can now be active because they have a trigger rate on them. There's an unknown factor as to how many of those traps will actually hit someone, right? So they have to be activated, trigger, in other words, and then they have to actually be set off by a troop. And if in fact they're set off by that troop, then if they have enough damage to kill that troop, they kill it. If they don't have enough damage to kill it, they damage it, and then the trap itself also dies. It's a one-time go, one-shot deal. The trap damages or kills something, and it itself dies. On consecutive rounds inside of the battle, let's say there's 15 rounds, let's say there's 40 rounds, whatever the case may be, the same repeats itself. If a trap goes off, it's dead forever. So in each battle, you're slowly losing traps. They don't come back. You've got to replace them. But also, it's an unknown amount of in my case, 49% of the traps that will even actually hit something. You can see that reflected in the report that we looked at, and that it was just random. I don't know, a total of, let's say, what do you think? 5,000, maybe, tops, of troops that were taken out by the traps themselves. So, how many traps do I have? Heck, I didn't even look at that. I just been throwing out this 200,000 number for the ease of math. But let's actually look. Hey, 261,000. So if I had 5,000 actually hit something, I have 260,000 troops. Essentially, half of those can trigger. All right, so 130, let's say 130,000 can trigger, but only 5,000 actually hit something. So you're starting to see that this math is really backwards on traps, and you have to have an absolute buttload of them, to really make any effect. And then even then, does it? Not really. Now, the reason I have 261,000 is just because, well, two reasons. One is very simplistic. Why would I not have them? Why would I not take out 5,000 more troops, or at least, hit or wound 5,000 more troops if I can do that with just simply having 260,000 troops. So I don't mind doing it. But the second and more complicated reason, this might be debatable, and I welcome some debate on it, but again, it comes back from old mechanics. Evony has always based their battle mechanics on this really interesting real world kind of activity. What I mean by that is, if you were to place a bunch of abatis, a bunch of crosses of wood out on the field, a bunch of trebuchets throwing stones, and all these I don't even know what you call the giant things that shoot the arrows, the giant arrows. Anyway, you set all these things out on the field, and then picture an army having to run through them. What it does is it actually creates congestion points and choke points, and causes the army itself to slow down, have to pile around these little things on the field and move forward. And this actually does take place, slowing down the forward movement and congesting the natural movement of the troops for the enemy as they move through your defenses. So do the traps themselves do a lot of damage? No, they don't, but they actually clog up the round system, the forward movement of the troop coming in at you, allowing all of your defensive structure and all your defensive troops themselves to actually do more damage to the troops as they're coming in. You understand? So it plays into a whole beautiful picture and helps you as a whole. Traps alone, by themselves, taken and set on the table, not very attractive. They don't make a lot of sense. But when you play them into a larger defense, and you have something that's already powerful, that's already hammering an enemy, and now you slow them down and leave them in that pocket a little bit longer, what you do is you take your entire defense, and you don't just increase it by the 5,000 troops that are dying, but you increase it exponentially by having that system in place and playing on the mechanics of the battlefield. And so that's why I have traps in there. Now, the little tiny trivial case in which I mentioned that I think traps largely play a part, if that part even matters, is, let's say someone wants to start an account that's free or close to free and really wants to stay tiny and not really do anything but reset thrones or take buildings or annoy people or scout or something like that. Then you can keep an account that doesn't really have anything in it, make it a Russian account, get Kiet on the wall, boost all of your trap attacks and HP and defense, whatever the assets are for traps, and then stack up on a boatload of traps and just ghost what little troops you have. Go sit over on the other server, or during kill event, just sit there, and essentially people are going to hit your empty keep and they're just going to lose troops. It might be 5,000, it might be 10,000, it might be 12,000 every time they hit you to the traps, which will put you points positive. In other words, the amount of power that you're going to lose losing traps is insignificant to the amount of power you'll gain by killing the troops with the traps. Now, is it significant in the overall? No, it's very tiny anyways. But if that's a pocket, you want to play in and find your place and you're happy there, it's a super easy one to do, and you definitely can do that. So in that sense, look, and back in the day, I actually did this. So back in the day, an account like that could sort of get away with having some fun because, well, hell, there was K25 and you couldn't go any higher. There was no events. There was no server war. So it made more sense. But I guess now there's that pocket. In any case, guys, this is my concept on traps. I certainly believe it is correct. It seems to play out that way to me for the last lot of years. And another thing I'll add is that, what's the tier? What's the deal with tier? Should I have layers? Well, quote unquote, layers do not quote unquote exist where traps are concerned. So you can do away with that. I don't know if I'd go in and dismiss older, smaller traps. I would just let them slowly get killed and go away, and then always build higher traps. But no, having a bunch of layers of traps doesn't matter. Now, do I have them? Yes. I have them, again, not because I think it creates more power for the traps themselves, but it just congests the field up. So every trap has its own trigger, its own, innate trigger rate inside of itself. So you could say, yes, there's a 49% trigger rate on the traps as a whole, but then also there's this unknown factor of how likely that trap is to actually hit something is built in and intrinsic, and we don't know what that is, but the higher the tier, the higher it is. You can see this reflect in the report itself. The lower in the tier the trap you go, the far less they'll trigger on something, and when they do trigger, the far less damage they'll do to that thing. So it makes more sense to have the highest tier you can possibly have in traps, but the reason I keep all tier in there, at least represented, is because of the congestion on the field. Not only do they have a different trigger rate innate built inside of them, but they all have a different position on the field. So a higher level trap might be further back or further forward. A lower level might be further back or further forward, in which case, in the interest to me, puts a lot of stuff on the field. And it creates a lot of congestion, slowing the round movement of the incoming army, boosting my own attack benefits. So guys, that's traps. The thing I want to mention before I let you go on this video is that the most important thing and the largest complaint you'll ever find on traps is when you play Battlefield. If you haven't gotten into the right Battlefield yet, I'm not talking about BOZ. If you haven't gotten into the right Battlefield yet, you don't know what I'm talking about. But let me tell you, there's a particular Battlefield or two that you can go in with 300,000 traps and come out with 0 and get your face stomped in that match as well. And it'll just wipe your traps out. And they're very expensive, actually. You might think that they're not, but to get a lot of traps is quite expensive. All right, guys, that wraps up this video. I'm not going to keep you forever. I just wanted to get in here and smash out my opinion on traps and kind of run over that and boil down how they play out. Now, what I didn't say, but you'll just have to do this on your own, is how to increase trap trigger rate. There's quite a few places that's found. It is in fact found in tech as well. So go, if you're interested in trap trigger rate, or if you want to make use of traps as much as you can, get that rate up there. Also your attack up there. And capacity is not that important because you don't need to have a boatload of these things, but make good use of the ones you do have. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is EvonyBites. I hope you have a good one. I'm going to get some more videos smashed out for you. You have a good evening, a good afternoon, a good morning. EvonyBites, out.
Why is there always a player in server chat running their mouth with about 50 million power, acting like their keep is all that, while the big boys do all the work from the hilltop, making big noise with big toys, digging tough soil, making hardly any noise, like professionals with great poise.